Hello friends, as you are well aware, we are running a series on modern drama, and the modern drama that we have belongs to the 20th century, and particularly to the western part of the world, where drama evolved from an older form to a new form. And so far as today's speaker is concerned, it is Professor Richa Bajaj, who teaches English in Hindu College, University of Delhi, and she is looking after that section of modern drama that belongs to America. So she has become a kind of an expert on American drama. She refers to the American background. She refers to the social and political and ideological formations that accompany drama writing in the 20th century. And today's lecture that she delivers would be on Arthur Miller. And she'll be focusing upon one or two plays of Arthur Miller. Now, before I request Professor Bajaj to begin his lecture, let me make a statement regarding, Arthur Miller, and I would like to pose some questions to her before I request her to respond to the questions and make a statement. Arthur Miller, as I know, was active in the 1940s and 50s, and this play particularly was written in 1949, and that is the period, when the Second World War has ended, and a large number of people have started experimenting with the drama form in a manner that they would not think of in the previous decades. Waiting for Godot was written in 1948 or so. This play is written in 1949, and there are many others. Bertolt Brecht also would be quite active in the fourth and fifth decades, 40s and 50s. So there is a kind of stream to which all these writers belong. So I'd like to request Dr. Bajaj to tell us about this particular time, when people started experimenting in a new way with the form called the drama. So, Professor Bajaj, what do you say regarding this?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point to begin with, actually, to talk about modern drama as it develops in the 1940s or so, because you see, this is also the period when theatre of absurd will come into play, and the absurdities of life and life which is understood to be devoid of meaning would be foregrounded in the theatre of absurd. Contrarily, there is, I think, the committed theatre, the theatre of commitment, really, to which belong playwrights such as Bertolt Brecht, Harold Pinter, and Arthur Miller. Also Tennessee Williams, if you look at this from the American point of view, including Clifford Odets and others. So I think 1940s sees a kind of also certainly experimentation. Yes, experimentation is key for in modern drama and used by playwrights on either side of the spectrum, whether they belong to the committed lot or they use theatre as a form to underline absurdities in life and mediocrities in life. So there are these two very important strains. Also, drama is very political in the 20th century, unlike other.
Before you go into the politics, you have used these words twice, absurdities of life. What exactly are the absurdities of life?
You see, for taking on from the modernists, I would say, theatre of absurd really belongs to the category of plays where the idea that life and has no meaning and that life is absurd, the very idea of living is has no essential meaning in itself, and that what we pursue is a kind of a myth or a kind of a mirage which is always incomprehensible and unachievable by the individual, and the individual is caught in this kind of a frenzy where one is trying to make sense of life and yet the inability to make sense of it. So I think theatre of the absurd tries to focus on that, along with features where where things just stand on their head and they don't make sense. So I think the idea of absurdity is to also highlight the meaninglessness of the endeavor. However, I think the playwrights who belong to the category of the committed theatre or theatre of commitment, they believed that life was certainly meaningless in the present context because of the pressures that were active on the individual, but it didn't have to be that way, and it wasn't that way. So that I think the difference between them, the two categories, would be that even though writers on both sides are sensitive writers who are trying to portray and project reality as they understand it or view it, I think the writers of the committed variety, they seem to have an optimistic sense of future, where they believe that things don't have to be the way they are today. So and that's where they bring in a sort of an added dimension to what exists.
So what you say is that the drama of the absurd and drama of commitment, they coexisted in the period.
Yeah, they coexisted, not harmoniously. I would say one was etched against the other and pitched against the other because, again, as I said, because these were political, because this is also the age of political theatre and radical theatre. Theatre was the space where prejudices of writers or prejudices came across, and also theatre was the space where one could actively engage with an audience and convert them on either side, I would say. So theatre was not this kind of innocent aesthetic space as literature had been perceived till, say, about the 19th century. Even in 19th century, even when you think of playwrights who were political, they weren't outright political, they were more reformist. Their approach was more towards highlighting the evils of society and looking for some kind of correction and changing people's sympathies, or channelizing people's sympathies and making them empathize with a particular situation or a character. By the time you reach the 20th century, I think that kind of stance is no more reformative. It has become quite etched in its viewpoint, the playwright's viewpoint, and the playwright through experimentation tries to engage with reality and present a view of reality, so which is not reformist, which is not just a kind of a patchwork or a corrective model, rather a kind of a view to challenge the existing order and to outline an alternative, I would say.
Are you saying that in the 20th century the drama did not remain important, dramatists became important?
I think dramatist's viewpoint became important, but drama also became important. Drama became very different in the 20th century. Let's put it this way. And how, you see, playwrights have always talked about a writer's mind, beginning from, for instance, from Shakespeare or even before Greek drama. So, they would go into, they will bring about soliloquies, as Shakespeare did in his own time, to project a character's state of mind. But it was just that, you see, there was the character state of mind which got projected in the soliloquy, and then everything else sort of took place as events took place in drama. 19th century also tried to dabble with psychology of the individual, but it could not present it in material terms. What 20th century drama really does is to manifest this internal conflict in the outer world, in the external world. It's almost as material, as palpable as objects. So, if we look at Arthur Miller's plays, and we have a discussion on Death of a Salesman in a bit, but you see, what the playwrights do is to make things which were just figments of one's mind very tangible, real things, and as dynamic as real life. So, in fact, they intersperse these two elements, illusion and reality, in a very interesting way, so that the illusion is as real, in fact, sometimes more real than reality. So, I think this is the new kind of experimentation that drama works with. Also, drama very interestingly interweaves language with one's mind, So, for instance, if we look at Pinter would use half sentences and just a word or sometimes just sounds to convey, because he would often feel that language doesn't convey such speech, such grammatical speech as we understand it, as the pattern that we use to say things, it often doesn't say. And the best is spoken when it is not spoken, or spoken in jerks and fits by characters. So Miller also uses that technique here. Miller is very conscious of randomly picking dialogues from home situations related to plumber and to the car that needs servicing, to the real meat of the the play, in the sense where he talks about the real problem of society. So it's not like one is outside the other, they're all meshed in one go.
The point is that the external reality is internalized by people, and they are caught as characters by modern drama. And the second thing that you say is that it is the writer who is becoming a kind of bridge between the reality of life and that life which is ordinary, which is commonplace at the level of language also, and that is made available in the dramatic form to the audience.
Yes, the dramatic form point is very important, I'd say, because the writer is trying to give a pattern to all these disconnected things, give a pattern to things that seem very ordinary, inane, just commonplace. Once they are put together, and just focusing on any character from Miller, for instance, you find that a character uses so many sentences from ordinary lives, which in taken autonomously would mean nothing, but once they are put in a pattern, once they are projected one after the other, they become shocking, almost terrorizing in the situation. They seem to haunt the audience as much as that kind of an environment haunts the character. So I think the play on language, the play with language, is one of the central features of experimentation in modern drama. As there is this play on the mind, I think it's very interesting how playwrights in the 20th century in modern drama use the mind as a very open space where so many layers and complexities exist, and it's not just about the character's present form, but all that the character has seen, heard, been with, people one has been with in the present, in the past, and the pressures that are active. There are so many dimensions in a character's mind. So what the playwrights really attempt to do in modern drama of the 20th century is to externalize that internal conflict, which is otherwise hidden, almost incomprehensible. I would say that nobody can enter. You can see a person, for instance, when you see a person, you judge a person based on how this person looks, dresses, talks, etc. But you don't have that kind of a physicality about one's mind. So what I think modern playwrights really do is to give this kind of a materiality, this form, look, language to the mind of a person. And why should they do that? One, of course, because there's been, from Freud onwards, there's been a deep sort of the kind of theories that have come about in psychoanalysis. There is a kind of a deep interest in psychology, because psychology is seen, of course, as integral to the human being, right? And also as a space that is not away from social pressures or societal influences. So one, of course, because there is this renewed interest in the 20th century regarding one's mind. Think of modernism, the stream of consciousness. What is it? It's a whole novel based on the mind of the individual that keeps going back and forth. So I think the mind suddenly becomes a very important space to interrogate and explore for writers, but also because as aesthetic, aesthetics of it would call, the dramatic aesthetic would require a kind of engagement with characters as people, as subjects, and not and see in them how a particular historical development plays out. So even when, for instance, Arthur Miller is talking about the life of Willie and Linda in Death of a Salesman, he is really talking about the larger historical life of America. So to be able to, jump those areas, to be able to straddle, I'd say, the personal and the political, the personal and the historical in this sense, through this kind of a new inventive way is what I think marks 20th century modern drama, in the new context.
The phrase that you have used is the mind having a space, an open space, and is being presented on the stage.
Right.
This is what you're saying. And this mind, in the case of Arthur Miller, in terms of characters, is presented on the stage, and you are face to face with that mental space.
Yeah, and anatomized in that sense, you
Yes.
know. So each part is dissected and the anatomy of the mind is seen. So what constitutes this mind? And it's not just sheer sort of interest in the mind per se, but to show how tragic the individual, the American individual at the time has become, how tragedy plays out, in the life of this character. And he's writing these tragedies talking about the family space. Again, if you notice, most playwrights deal with this kind of a family space. So I often wonder that can we ever write plays, can we ever write literature without talking about without talking about families? Because and by families I don't mean the institution family. What I mean is how people connect with other people, and of course the immediate experience is that of the family. So literature often works through this individual to speak of this kind of fragile relationships that individuals have with with family members. Now, of course, when I say fragile relationships, then of course fragile because it's the institution that then governs it. It's the institution of the family that forces the sons to take care of the father or follow the father, or and if they don't see, then they are seen as the villains of the story. So it's not like a kind of a community that they live in, but there is a parental structure, there is a kind of a family structure that they need to follow. So so while there is this social normative familial sort of space, there is also the outside sphere that is always daunting for the family, and that family is trying to hold on. Something which is also there in Tennessee Williams. He talks about a family really trying to hold on while everything around them is breaking apart and falling apart. Of course, they are in that sense contemporaries and writing around the Depression years and the war years. So that in a way, because the reality is similar for them, so they seem to be talking about, both these playwrights, Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller, they both seem to be talking about families that are falling apart because of the 1929 crash and so on and so forth.
There is a phrase that you used in the middle of your discussion, that was the materiality of the mind.
Right.
What exactly is that?
What I mean is that I might be able to explain it better in the context of Death of a Salesman, really. But what I mean really is that the mind is not just an illusion anymore, or the things that exist in the mind are not just I would say not merely figments, or not just things that are imagined, but they exist as reality. And what exists in the mind is, and the idea that memory, or for that matter imagination, or just fancy of the mind, they have a material base, in the sense that they emerge from certain influences in life, they emerge from certain spheres of life that one might have forgotten altogether. For instance, if I take the case of just Willie in Death of a Salesman, then you find that there is this his brother Ben, who keeps figuring in his mind, and is almost given a kind of representation. There is a character called Ben who's walking in the foreground and who's actually a part of Willie's mind. So when I said materiality, that these writers provide a materiality to the mental conceptions or fancies or memories, then I meant that how Ben, who's dead, who doesn't even exist today, is projected on stage as a character, and who's walking. The ghost, for instance, the projection of a ghost on stage is giving materiality to something which does not exist. So this is what I mean. So the play on this to suggest that there is in fact the mind and the elements of the mind, whether there is, so for instance, Willie imagines and talks to his sons when they were kids, right? Now these kids are actually walking on the stage. So that's what I meant, that the materiality to the mind, in the sense that what exists in his mind in terms of his memory or his imagination actually is projected as a kind of a human being who's walking the stage. So that's what I meant. So it's to be able to show the materiality of that imagination, that these characters who otherwise don't exist in the main body of the play but are a part of Willy's imagination are actually walking the stage. So, and hence the materiality of his mind.
So whatever is contained in the memory of Willy is presented on the stage as an actual thing, and that is what, according to you, is the materiality of the mind.
Right. To be able to place these, to be able to see what we cannot see. You can't see my ideas, but once I put those ideas in the form of a human being, you see them. So, and interestingly, each character in that sense becomes a metaphor, including Willy, in this play. So a metaphor for something. For Ben is the this metaphor for instant success, for instance. So you see, these characters then exist as metaphors, and all these imaginative characters also exist as metaphors in this play. And therefore I say that the idea which he wants to transfer, which he wants to convey to the audience, becomes more palpable and more of a, it has a better impact on the audience when it is presented as a character who talks, speaks, breathes, and has an attitude, has a dress, has a form. So he's able to give a form to that idea, an external form to that idea, which is when it in fact becomes even more, the tragedy of Willy becomes more daunting, more tragic in that sense.
In the course of the discussion, I think you have created another problem, and you'll have to face it now. The problem is character as a metaphor.
Right.
What exactly is it? If you could explain.
So if
for the benefit of the viewers.
Yes, sure, because that's I think a central point of this play. Just talking about the title, it might just help in that. It's Death of a Salesman, right? Now, who is this salesman? Willy refers to a salesman in the play itself when he goes to meet his boss Howard, and he says, well, that was the death of a salesman there. But finally, at the end of the play, he is the salesman who's dead. And Arthur Miller, at one of his interviews, said that we are all salesmen. We are all selling something. We are all putting our best foot forward and becoming a likable. Willy's whole idea is that my children should be likable people. How am I'm not dressing to advantage, he says. So to be likable people, to be charming, is something that Willy really emphasizes in his own person and in his sons. So the idea is that everybody out there is selling something, and the metaphor is that the salesman is actually selling himself. So in this marketplace that society is, he's actually selling himself by being charming, by being likable, by being kind of a person who would be approached and liked and then get on and get ahead in life. So in a way, what are we selling? Are we also selling our soul in the meantime? We are actually selling. When Willy goes to sell, we don't know what he's selling. It's never told to us in the play. But when Willy as a salesman goes about from one place to the other, when he's traveling these different cities, he is selling something. But in actuality, he is actually selling himself. Now, when I say selling himself, it becomes a larger metaphor of the salesman itself. That who is the salesman? Each character then is a salesman. And we as people, or Arthur Miller in the American context, wants to suggest that each character, each individual is selling oneself and selling one's dignity. That's the main point of this play. That Willy finally sells his own dignity because he cannot find enough money to make a living. So the character of Willy as salesman is a metaphor of this salesman, that is of the idea of selling, of a salesman as selling one's soul or one's dignity, one's human self in society that has no place for him if he cannot sell himself. So that's the larger metaphor of this particular thing. That's how I look at the entire idea of characters as metaphors.
Friends, in this part of the discussion, we have come across some new concepts about modern drama relating to the situation in America in the middle of the 20th century, and the points were seminal and they were explained for our benefit. And I think in the following discussion, there will be more focus, yet more focus on Willy Loman, his family, and the idea of death of a salesman who dies, and the death is not of the person but of the salesman. So with this we come to the end of the first part of the discussion. Thank you.